Class is officially in session, and Scott Frost is almost done filling out his staff.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. We're talking staffing hires once again. Scott Frost has been hard at work this offseason trying to get a staff hired and fill out that staff. He's got a few more important positions to fill here, the least of which is not the least of which is special teams. Now, like I know, special teams is one of those position groups where if you don't get it right and it's a disaster, it can spell trouble for you during the season. And Coach Frost has reached for Pete Alomar to become the next special teams coordinator. Again, Pete Alomar. Alomar was quoted as saying after his hire, "I'm incredibly grateful to Coach Scott Frost for this opportunity to join his coaching staff as special teams coordinator. My goal is to develop and lead the best special teams unit in the Big 12 and nationally, and I cannot wait to get to work with our players and coaches." That is Coach Pete Alomar, special teams coordinator, joining Scott Frost's staff in year one. He was most recently the associate head coach and special teams coordinator at Rice, and he served as the interim coach for the final 4 games of Rice's season. They won a pair of games while he was there, most notably a 24-20 win over Navy. They finished the season 10-3 with only 2 losses in conference play, and they had a 35-28 win against South Florida. Look, his kickoff unit ranked 9th nationally, averaging 26.22 yards per return. So Pete Alomar has been tabbed as a special teams coordinator for Scott Frost again in year one. And hopefully they can get this together. Now, there are a lot of things that UCF is going to have to do, and you don't want to have to worry about special teams. Alomar is a experienced guy. He's a guy with a ton of college football experience. And when you look at his resume, it's not hard to understand why they reached for him to fill this position. He's coached at the Power 5 level before. He had a stint at Stanford, Fresno State, Cal, Arizona for a number of years there from 95 to 99. So Pete Alomar, again, tabbed as special teams coordinator for Scott Frost here. This is a guy who coached Deshaun Jackson. I don't know if you remember Mr. Deshaun Jackson, but he was in the running for the Heisman while Pete Alomar was at Cal. Deshaun Jackson was one of the most dynamic punt returners and kickoff returners in the country. And if Alomar can produce anything close to that, it's going to be a huge boost for Scott Frost in year one to have playmakers on special teams. Special teams can win you games. It can lose you games. Hopefully it wins more games than it loses for UCF here in the first year. So again, Pete Alomar has got a really, really decorated resume. I think that he's going to do well here, special teams coach. When you look at a lot of the special teams rankings that UCF had, they don't rank in the top 50 in almost any special teams category last year, which I think is indicative of the type of season they had, where it seemed like it was Murphy's Law and nothing would go right for UCF. Special teams definitely was an area where they could use a lot of improvement. So can Alomar help get that group together? Frost is going to lean on them. And in today's college football, you have to be able to delegate. He cannot be worried about special teams. He's got to be not only a coach and a play caller, but he's got to be a CEO. He's going to be focused on making sure that they recruit at a high level. He's got to fundraise. NIL is a big part of this. And when you can bring coaches like Alomar in and turn this part of the program over without having to worry about how your special teams is going to do, I think it's going to be a huge advantage for Scott Frost here in year one. So again, I want to reiterate, UCF didn't rank in the top 50 in college football in any special teams category just about last year. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do with that unit. Going down his resume, his specialists did well at Stanford, and uh, it stood out. Christian McCaffrey was on a unit that Alomar coached over at Stanford. Obviously, you guys know who Christian McCaffrey is. So this is a guy who has experience with some big time players in big time college football that have gone on to do well at the NFL. Not hard to see why they decided to tab Alomar as the next coach. But hey, he wasn't the only hire that Scott Frost had announced this week. We're going to talk about his next hire right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Look, the college football playoffs are live right now. As a matter of fact, as I'm recording this, Texas and Ohio State are going at it to see who gets a spot in that final game. I personally made a bunch of money betting against Oregon and on Ohio State. Ohio State did not fail to deliver. But hey, look, no matter who you decide to bet on, do it with our friends at FanDuel. You're guaranteed $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Not only did Scott Frost hire a special teams coordinator, he went out and he got his next running backs coach. And who is that? Well, we all know that running back was an area of strength for UCF last year. RJ Harvey, we had a discussion earlier in the week about whether RJ Harvey was the best back in UCF history. I think he was. I think it's harder to do in what he did in today's college football. But the guy who is tabbed to lead his position group next year or this coming season is Jimmy Beal, running backs coach. We got a quote here from Beal. Beal says, "I'm thrilled to join the UCF coaching staff as the running backs coach and become part of such a storied program with a tradition of excellence. I'm grateful to Coach Scott Frost for believing in me and giving me this incredible opportunity. UCF is a special place with a proud history of running backs, and I can't wait to get to work with this talented group of student athletes and compete in the Big 12. That's Jimmy Beal, running backs coach, now at UCF. So, what is Beal's resume look like? Well, he had a stint coaching running backs at Utah State. He helped the Aggies rank in the top 5 in the Mountain West in rushing with just under 200 yards in rushing per game. Jimmy Beal is the next running backs coach here at UCF under Scott Frost. Look, the run game can save you. And if they can get the run game together this year, it's going to give a lot of grace to whoever plays quarterback. Now, we talked about Cam Fancer coming in, and they went out and they got some guys at QB. Taven Jackson has joined this squad. Having a solid run game will allow these quarterbacks some leeway to be able to come along in Frost's system. So what does it look like in year one? Well, we talked a lot about where is the floor for UCF. My good friend Statboy Drew thinks that the floor is around 6-6. And, a lot of you guys agreed with him. I personally believe in today's college football, there are not a lot of teams that don't have enough talent to go 6-6. And that floor with Scott Frost as a play caller should be set at 7-5. But that's going to depend a lot on how well they can run the ball. Running the ball wasn't the issue for UCF this year. Between him and Ja'Curry Brown, when he was at quarterback, they had a dynamic run game. Now, Dylan Risks returns to this QB room. He's not as much of a runner as Ja'Curry Brown was. And, even Taven Jackson, not a big runner when you look at his stats. But the run game is something that they're going to be looking to lean on, I think, in Scott Frost's first year. And so what Beal is able to do with that group is going to be critical to UCF's success in year one. In 2024, UCF was the #1 rush offense in the Big 12 at 248 yards per game and 33 touchdowns on the ground. That is UCF in the run game. Look, that's lofty. Those are lofty stats, I think, to live up to if you're Jimmy Beal, and you've got to produce. If you're not able to produce at that position, that's going to be rough going, I think, for UCF here this year in Scott Frost's first year. In the 12 games that they played, 516 attempts that produced 2,977 yards. But most importantly, a 5.8 yard per rush average, which was really, really, really good. Average yards per rush at 5.8 was second in the Big 12 last year, only behind Kansas State, which had 6.1 yards per rush. So if you're UCF, you can't take a step back in the run game here in year one of the Scott Frost era. You've got to find a way to move that forward. And I understand that replacing RJ Harvey is no small task, but they've got to find a way forward, with these guys here. And they've got to find a way to do this thing at a high level in the run game. Scott Frost has an opportunity to remind people why he was such a dynamic coach his first go around at UCF. And a big part of that is putting together a solid staff. So Jimmy Beal tabbed as running backs coach. I love what I heard from him. We're hoping to hear even more from him this spring as UCF prepares for spring football. But hey, look, that wasn't the only news. Coaching hires weren't the only news. There was some transfer portal news, and one that I particularly want to highlight right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Look, are you tired of waiting and wondering and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions, whether you've got one form or 20. TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress. So you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger. You'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head on over to TurboTax.com and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. UCF had a portal pickup. Wide receiver Marcus Burke from Florida as a UCF Knight. Burke joins UCF, logging 7 receptions for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns last year with the Florida Gators. Marcus Burke joins UCF from the transfer portal. So UCF continues to try to fill out that wide receiver room. And Marcus Burke is a former top 150 guy that they're bringing in here. Marcus Burke is a former top 200 recruit joining Scott Frost's roster here. Former 4-star wide receiver that signed with Florida. He had offers from just about everywhere. And this is a great pickup. If you're UCF, you've got to find talent wherever you can get it here in year one. And until they catch up, I think in terms of on-field product, in terms of proof of concept, again, at UCF, picking up players and talent like this is going to be super important. Florida has a history of signing top wide receivers, and so it's not out of the realm of possibility that there could be a starter sitting on the bench there at Florida. Again, he didn't play a ton when you look at his stats from 2024, but he did log some stats, and there's a little bit of tape on him here in 2024. Looking at his game log was interesting. Again, only 4 games did he play in last year. So clearly they see something here in Marcus Burke, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with a lot of these guys from the portal. UCF has done well in the portal, I think, so far early in Scott Frost's tenure, and it's going to be really important that they continue to lean on the portal to fill out that offense and find talent where maybe guys have been overlooked, or there just wasn't room at their program, and UCF is trying to build. His best games, he had about 3 receptions, again, a pair of touchdowns on the season. So not a ton to look at there for Marcus Burke, but again, a former top 200 player, bordering on 150. It just depends on what service that you're looking at there. But 247 had him as the number 1, 247 had him as the 173rd prospect coming out of high school. Marcus Burke was. So, look, great pickup for Scott Frost and staff. I think that they're going to continue to build this roster in year one until they get to a place where they feel comfortable that they can produce high-level offense here, or as high level as they can produce in Scott Frost's first year. So Marcus Burke joins the staff. I want to thank you guys for joining me here on Locked On UCF and making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends over at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us right here on Locked On UCF.